I used to tell myself that what my stepmother thought of me didn't really matter. I'd convinced myself, somewhere around age 17, that I'd outgrown the need for her approval the way you outgrow a pair of shoes. Quietly, without ceremony, leaving them behind without looking back. I was wrong. Not about outgrowing her, about the cost. My name is Isla. And this is the story of how the woman who spent 20 years deciding I didn't belong in her family ended up watching me on a screen she couldn't turn off. Growing up, our house in Savannah had the kind of deliberate warmth that came from a decorator rather than a life lived. My father, Warren, married my stepmother Marlena when I was 10 years old, 3 years after my mother died. Marlena was beautiful and organized, and exactly the kind of woman who turns a household into a production. Monogrammed everything, color-coded calendars, a standing dinner reservation at the same French bistro every Saturday. She wasn't cruel, exactly, she was efficient. And in her efficient mind, a grieving child, who still talked about her dead mother's cooking, was a variable that didn't quite fit the equation she'd designed. My father loved me. I've never doubted that. But my father was also the kind of man who loved peace more than truth, and Marlena gave him a very peaceful home as long as everyone agreed to play their part. My part, without anyone saying it aloud, was to be grateful and quiet, and to take up as little space as possible. Then Sky was born, 3 years into the marriage, and the space I was allowed contracted even further. I don't say that bitterly. Sky is 10 years younger than me, and she grew up wanting nothing except my approval, which I gave freely because she had nothing to do with the choices the adults in our family made. She was outgoing and socially magnetic in the way Marlena was, walked into rooms like she'd already claimed them. I was the one who spent family dinners with a book tucked under my chair in case the conversation became unbearable. In our house, that translated to, Sky's the daughter who lights things up. Isla is the one who makes everything complicated without even trying. I cooked mostly. That was the thing I'd inherited from my mother. Her handwritten recipe cards, her insistence that garlic should always be fresh, never jarred, her belief that feeding people was the most honest form of love. I'd fill the kitchen with the smell of browned butter and cardamom on Sunday mornings. And sometimes my father would wander in with his coffee and say, "Sss, God, that smells exactly like your mother." And Marlena would find some reason to leave the room. I left for college at 18 with 2 suitcases and a shoebox full of my mother's recipe cards. I built a life in Asheville. First waitressing, then line cooking, then food writing for a regional magazine that eventually led to a column, then a book deal with an independent press. My editor, Bridget, told me the proposal was the most personal thing she'd read in a year. I'd built it entirely around my mother's recipes. The working title was What She Left Me. I went home for holidays. I drove 6 hours for my father's birthday dinners and Sky's high school graduation, and the Sunday afternoon my stepmother hosted for her sister's engagement. I showed up, every time. Not because anyone asked specifically, but because that's what family does. That's what I had always told myself. When my father turned 60 and announced his retirement after 32 years of teaching high school chemistry, I was genuinely thrilled for him. He'd earned it. I called him the night he told me, and we talked for 40 minutes about what he wanted to do with his time. The garden he'd been neglecting. The road trip he and my mother had always planned but never taken. The version of himself that existed before he was responsible for everyone else. It was one of the best conversations we'd had in years. I offered to cater the party. Of course I did. Cooking for my father was the most natural thing I could imagine. I had specific ideas. His favorite dishes, food that would feel like home, a dessert I'd been perfecting for 2 years based on a cake my mother used to make for birthdays. I sent Marlena a 3-paragraph email with options and a sample menu. She responded in 4 sentences. "So thoughtful of you, Isla. We've actually already hired a catering team. They're wonderful. Don't worry about a thing. Just come and enjoy yourself." I told myself that was fine. Parties are stressful. Not everything is personal. Then, I found out about the committee. I learned about it the way you learn about most things you weren't supposed to know. By accident, through someone who didn't realize they were telling me something they shouldn't. My cousin Bex forwarded me a screenshot meant for someone else, pulled from a group chat called Warren's Big Night. Planning crew. Inside was a thread going back 4 months. Venue negotiations, a slideshow Sky was putting together, catering tastings my father had attended, a florist quote that included a line from Marlena noting, in her very particular way, that they were keeping the guest list tight and intentional. We don't want the energy getting muddied. Muddied. I read that word 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter, and stood there with my hands flat on the tile, trying to remember when I had become the kind of person whose presence muddies things. I didn't say anything to anyone. I told myself it was a planning group, not an exclusion. Families organize events in imperfect ways. I kept making my regular calls, kept responding to the group text about the party date, kept assuming my invitation was coming. It came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the event. Not in the mail. Hand-delivered, by Marlena herself, who drove the 6 hours to Asheville without calling ahead, and appeared at my apartment door in a silk blouse and the particular expression she wore when she'd already prepared what she was about to say. "I wanted to do this in person," she said, which should have told me everything. She sat down at my kitchen table and folded her hands like she was chairing a meeting. Your father's party has become something really special, she started. The venue, the people, the whole evening. It's exactly what he deserves, and I just want to make sure nothing disrupts that. I waited. Sky is giving a toast. There are going to be people there from your father's career, colleagues, former students, the neighbors. It matters, the impression we make. And you and I both know, Isla, that you and I have our history. I think everyone in a room picks up on that, even when no one says a word. I don't want your father's night to become about us. Then don't make it about us, I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. She smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm trying to protect the evening, sweetheart. That's all I'm asking you to do as well. Sit this one out. It's truly the kinder choice. I looked at her for a long moment. At the silk blouse and the folded hands and the word sweetheart deployed like a period at the end of a sentence she'd already decided. Does my father know you're here? I asked. A pause. The kind that tells you everything before the answer arrives. We discussed it together. Okay, I said. You understand. I understand, I said. She left 20 minutes later. I walked her to the door, closed it softly behind her, and went back to my kitchen and stood in the same spot I'd been standing in when I read the word muddied. This time I didn't move for a very long time. I did not call my father. I thought about it. I picked up my phone 3 times. But something in me had gone very still, the way a room goes still before the power cuts out. Not calm exactly, just suspended. Waiting. I called my best friend Tony that night instead. She'd known me for 11 years. Since we'd worked the same brunch shift at a restaurant in our mid-20s. And bonded over our shared hatred of hollandaise. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. And when I finished, she was quiet for a beat before she said, Your mother's cookbook. Are you going to finish it or not? I hadn't expected that. What? The book. What she left me. You've been sitting on the final manuscript for 4 months. I think you should stop waiting. I sat with that for a minute. You think I should publish a book about my dead mother, to get back at my stepmother? No, Tony said. I think you should publish a book about your dead mother because it's the best thing you've ever written and your mother deserves to exist in the world in the way you wrote her. The timing is just clarifying. I opened my laptop at midnight. I pulled up the manuscript and read through the final chapter for the first time in months. It was good. I'd been afraid to admit how good it was, the way you're afraid to want something too much. I sent one email to Bridget. I'm ready. Let's talk launch strategy. She responded at 7 in the morning, finally. Call me at 9. I didn't go to my father's party. On the night of the event, I was in Asheville, in my own kitchen, making my mother's cardamom cake. The one I'd been perfecting for 2 years, the one I'd wanted to bring. I made it alone at 9 in the evening while my phone lit up with Instagram posts I hadn't been tagged in. My father in a navy suit, beaming. Sky in a green dress raising a glass. Marlena at the center of every photo, one hand always somewhere near my father's arm like a claim being staked in real time. I watched for a while. Then I put my phone in a drawer, ate a slice of cake over my kitchen sink, and thought about my mother, who had died in the spring, who had loved my father so completely that she'd never made him choose, who had taught me to cook with the windows open even in February because, she said, a kitchen should breathe. I thought, the kitchen I grew up in stopped breathing a long time ago. That night I made 3 decisions. I would finish the book. I would plan the launch event myself, the way I would have catered my father's party. With intention, with meaning, and I would include a public component. A live stream, a partnership with the food pantry I'd been volunteering with for 6 years that funded after-school cooking programs for kids in under-resourced schools. I wanted the book to feed people, not just metaphorically, actually. Bridget ran with it, faster than I expected. A restaurant in Charleston agreed to host the launch dinner. A cinematographer who'd filmed 3 James Beard Award events agreed to handle the stream. A lifestyle platform with 3 million followers agreed to co-host, because, their editor told me, the book proposal had made her cry on the subway. I didn't tell anyone in my family. They were busy posting throwback photos from the retirement party, captioning them with words like so blessed and family first. My name was nowhere in any of it. Not the posts, not the thank yous, not the caption that listed everyone Sky wanted to acknowledge in her toast. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even particularly hurt, which was its own kind of surprise. I had somewhere else to be. The launch event was on a Thursday evening in October. 60 guests in person, colleagues, fellow food writers, staff from the food pantry, people who had written to me over the years saying my columns had changed how they cooked. The live stream went public at 7 p.m., under the title What She Left Me, a dinner and a book launch. I stood at the front of that restaurant, in a dress the color of bone, and told the story I had been carrying for 20 years. My mother's kitchen, the smell of cardamom on Sunday mornings, the recipe cards in her handwriting that I'd kept in a shoebox through every move, every hard year, every dinner eaten alone in a family that had decided I was too complicated to include. I talked about what it means to feed people as an act of love. I talked about what it means to lose the person who taught you that, and spend 20 years trying to speak her language in a house where nobody else understood it. By the time I read the dedication aloud, the comments were already moving faster than I could follow. The dedication read, "For my mother, who set the table with everything she had, and left me the recipes so I would always know how." Someone in the comments recognized me from an old food column. Then someone else connected it to a piece I'd written 2 years earlier about learning to cook in a home where you didn't quite belong. Within 40 minutes, the hashtag was circulating. By the time we sat down for dinner, the stream had 30,000 viewers. By the time dessert arrived, the cardamom cake, the one I'd made alone on the night of my father's party, it was over 90,000. The book pre-orders hit the publisher's server so hard the website crashed twice. The total raised for the food pantry's after-school program, by end of the weekend, was $214,000. Tony, who had been monitoring the comment section with what she called professional interest and I called gleeful surveillance, texted me, "Your dad's former students are watching. His neighbors are watching. People from his retirement party are doing the math." The texts from my family started at midnight. "My father, Isla, I'm seeing your name everywhere. Is this your event? Why didn't you tell us?" "Sky, I'm watching the stream right now. I didn't know any of this. Are you okay?" "Marlena, at 1:15 in the morning, this was deliberate. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, I want you to know this is not how family behaves." I read Marlena's text once, set my phone down on the restaurant table, and looked at the room, which was still full of people who had come specifically to be there, to celebrate this thing I had made. I thought, I know exactly how family behaves. I've been watching you demonstrate it for 20 years. I didn't write back to any of them that night. My father called 4 times the following morning. I let it ring twice, then picked up on the third. "Isla," he said. His voice had the register it took on when he was trying to manage something he didn't know how to manage. "I've been getting messages from people I haven't spoken to in years. Your former professor, my old department head, your mother's sister in Portland." "Okay," I said. "Why didn't you tell me what you were planning?" I waited a beat. "Why didn't you call me before she drove to Asheville to tell me not to come to your party?" Silence. "That's not," he started. "It was complicated." "It wasn't, actually," I said. "It was very simple. She didn't want me there, and you let her make that decision, and I've been watching that happen my whole life and choosing not to name it. I'm naming it now." A long silence, the kind that holds a lot of things that haven't been said over a lot of years. "You looked," he started, and then stopped. And when he started again, his voice was quieter, less managed. "On the stream. You looked like your mother, the way you talked about her. I'd forgotten how much you sound like her when you really mean something." That landed somewhere in my chest I hadn't expected. "She would have been there," I said, "at the party. She would have made the cake." He didn't say anything for a long time, then very quietly, "I know." It wasn't an apology. It was something closer to a reckoning, the first honest acknowledgement I could remember, unmediated by Marlena's careful framing. It wasn't enough to fix 20 years, but it was real, and I let it be what it was. Marlena called once more. 2 days later, I picked up. "You've embarrassed this family," she said. Her voice was controlled but thin at the edges. "No," I said. "I published a book about my mother and raised $200,000 for children who need access to good food. That's what I did. What happened to your reputation is a separate matter you're going to have to work out on your own." A long pause. "You could have handled this differently. You could have invited me to my father's party," I said. "Funny how choices work." I hung up gently, not in anger, just done. The weeks that followed were strange and clarifying in equal measure. The book sold through its first printing in 9 days. My editor called crying, which she said she had never done in 30 years of publishing. A food magazine ran a profile calling what she left me the rare cookbook that reads like a love letter and lands like a gut punch. My mother's cardamom cake recipe was the most shared page in the excerpt the publisher released online. 3 months after the launch, Sky came to Asheville. She didn't announce herself in advance, which was uncharacteristic. She'd always planned arrivals the way Marlena planned events. She showed up on a Saturday afternoon, with a bottle of wine, and the look of someone who had been composing what they were about to say for a very long time. We sat on my back porch and she talked, about the party planning, about what she'd known and hadn't known, about the ways she'd chosen not to look too closely at things that made her uncomfortable because it was easier not to. She didn't make excuses, she just laid it out, and that honesty cost her something. I could tell. "My mom told me you were too sensitive for big family events," she said at one point. She said it so many times I stopped questioning it. I just believed her. "I know," I said. I watched the whole stream, 3 times. She looked at her wine glass. I cried every time. I thought about all the Sunday mornings. Sky had wandered into the kitchen as a little kid while I was cooking, climbing onto the counter to see what I was making, her little voice asking if she could stir something. Those were some of the easiest moments I'd ever had in that house. "There's a recipe in there for you," I told her. "I didn't put your name in it, but you'd know it. The brown butter cookies. You ate half a batch in about 4 minutes when you were 6. She laughed, and something broke loose in the air between us. My father came alone 6 weeks after that, without Marlena, which was the only reason I opened the door. We sat in my kitchen and I made coffee and he asked about the book, and I could tell he had actually read it, not just skimmed it. He had specific questions about specific chapters. He got quiet at the dedication page. She would have been proud of you, he said. She was always proud of you. I know, I said. You didn't need to let her be erased. He looked at his coffee. No, I didn't. That was the most he said about it directly. We talked for 2 hours about other things. The garden, the road trip being planned for spring, a former student who'd emailed him after seeing the stream. Before he left, he stood in my doorway and looked at my kitchen. The open shelves, the copper pots, the wooden bowl of garlic on the counter, and something moved across his face I didn't have a name for. You made a home, he said. I did, I said. He left. I didn't watch him walk to his car. I went back inside and finished my coffee and stood in my kitchen with the windows open, the way my mother always had, because a kitchen should breathe. Marlena posted something public 8 weeks after the launch. A careful message that tagged me and said something about family and growth, and the book being a testament to the bond between mothers and daughters. I didn't respond, and I didn't share it, and I didn't feel the way I might have expected to feel. I'd spent a long time wanting that acknowledgement. Now that it had arrived, dragged out by public pressure and shaped by image management, it had nothing to do with me. It was a performance for an audience I had stopped belonging to. A year after the launch, I hosted a dinner, small, quiet, my apartment, 8 people, no cameras, Tony, Bridget, 2 friends from the food pantry, and Sky, who brought flowers from a Savannah market and spent 45 minutes in my kitchen, asking questions about every dish I was making, touching the manuscript copy I kept framed on my wall. After dinner, Sky stayed to help me clean up, and at some point she stopped drying a bowl and said, I keep thinking about what you wrote in the book, about the table. I had written that my mother believed a table set with love has no seat limits. That the size of the welcome is never about the room, always about the person doing the inviting. What about it? I asked. I think she never understood that, Sky said slowly, like she was working it out as she spoke. Marlena, I mean. She always thought the table was the point, the right chairs, the right people, the right image. She set the bowl down. She never understood that it's not about the table. I thought about the kitchen I had grown up in, and the kitchen I had built here, and the distance between them. The first had been decorated within an inch of its life. The second had garlic on the counter, and windows that stayed open and the smell of something real. No, I said, she never did. I used to believe that belonging was something granted to you, a seat you were given, a name that was included, a place in the photo. I spent 20 years trying to earn that seat, in a room that had been designed without me in mind. Now I understand that the table was never theirs to withhold. I just had to build my own.